Hello and welcome to another episode of Taking Back Saturday, a Happy Buyers Club podcast where we break down the real estate market each and every Friday to help home buyers build confidence, follow a process and hopefully buy really happy. Today we are talking all things investment properties with the Queen of Brisbane Property Management, Brooke Willis from Brooke Willis Property. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
How are the nerves?
Pretty good.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
we'll make it work. All right, first up, how's the rental market?
It's great. Rental market, it has been great ever since we saw that big hike in COVID. Obviously, we haven't seen as substantial jumps since then, but, it's been really strong since. Vacancy is still critically low, which means, there's good demand in the market and people's properties are getting rented really quickly.
What's critically low mean?
Critically low means it's really tight. There's not a lot of vacant properties. The vacancy rate is sitting around 1%. It's been lower than that in previous months, but right now it's sitting around that 1%, which is critically low. It means that there's not many vacant properties at all in Brisbane. We need more supply in the market for sure.
So when people are struggling to buy a house, there are people struggling to rent a house as well.
Absolutely. I would say there's probably more people struggling to rent a house than there would be buy a house for sure.
That's the genuine housing crisis.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. How do you manage that with people when you get a lineup of, we'll talk about buying investment properties and what to look for at some point, but let's focus on the human bit. You got 40 people lining up. They're genuinely worried they're going to be homeless. How do you sort of work through that? Because you guys are very hands-on. I would say very high empathy.
Yeah, we are. And look, we just try to give everybody the best opportunity. We encourage everybody to put their best foot forward. We give them deadlines as to when they need to have their application in by. We give them tips as to what to include in their application, because when you've got such a high demand like that, the owner's going to make a decision pretty quickly. So you've got to make sure that you are presenting your application as strong as possible to give you the best foot forward. Obviously, we don't make the decision who goes into the property. That is up to the landlord. They're the ones that make that final call. But, all we can do is kind of condition those tenants to give them the best opportunity when it comes to submitting that application. Gone are the days of people offering above the listed price, because they're not allowed to do that anymore.
Good.
Which has obviously ruled out a lot of that unfairness that we saw in the market with some people applying, $100, $150 above the listed price. So now it really just comes down to terms of your application, quality of the application, how long you're looking to take it for, when your move-in date is, what your rental history is looking like and what your employment's looking like.
Nice. I'm going to come back to tenants because I think that's a really important part of the investment property situation. But let's talk about investment properties for a second. Not every property has a lineup of people looking to rent it. So what makes a good rental property?
Look, it depends on price. Is obviously a huge indication. We obviously look after a lot of high-end properties. So your high-end properties, you're not going to have a lineup of 40 people out the door because people's different affordability and budgets and things like that. But, if you are buying a property that is returning in that mid-range kind of $700 to $900 per week, I would say, that is probably, and it's a house or even a townhouse, I would say that is probably the most popular market. Something that presents well, is neat and tidy, doesn't need to be, immaculately renovated or anything like that. It's things like little cosmetic upgrades, liquor paint, new carpet to make it presenting well, makes those rental properties really appealing to tenants. And they're the ones that kind of fly off the shelf like hotcakes because they present really well, they are reasonably priced, and they appeal to a lot of families and also other people sharing and couples and things like that in the market.
We get a lot of questions from potential investor clients of ours where they're like, am I going to get better rent with a townhouse than a house? Is it going to cost me less money, potentially, and I'm going to get better rent?
I would say yes, it's definitely going to cost you less money because obviously, as we know, houses, depending on whether they're a Queenslander or even your standard brick houses, they just come with a lot of maintenance. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, land value is going to be better if you are buying for that purpose, but you've got to take into consideration that there are going to be some maintenance costs, there are going to be some holding costs with a house. Whereas with a townhouse, yes, you might get a few little bits and pieces here and there, but they're generally pretty low maintenance. And in terms of your return, yeah, it can be really on par with a house and a townhouse. And we are finding sometimes, especially with a lot of groups of tenants, they don't want the big backyard to look after. Yes, some families do. They love that. But a lot of people will take a townhouse that's got a little courtyard, bit of grass. They might have, one little dog or something like that. And they actually like that it's very low maintenance. So it's low maintenance for the owner, but it is also low maintenance for the tenant as well, which obviously makes it more appealing in the market.
Nice. I'm going to ask you a question just to hopefully validate some of our thinking. But if we're wrong, hey, we'll be publicly wrong now. If we're looking for investment property, and we would typically go for something that has a minimum of 3 bedrooms, just because I think it does increase the rent that you're going to get, and it opens up the tenant profile to be more than a couple potentially, or a single.
Yep.
We also look at school catchments.
Yes.
Because a lot of people will actually go and rent
Yep.
to get that piece of paper
Huge.
so they can get into the right school.
Yeah.
Is that one, good theory, and two, does it make a fundamental difference in the amount of money you might be able to get?
Absolutely, because it's going to increase the competition on the property. It's going to increase your inquiry on the property, which in turn will obviously increase the return that you get on the property. I'm a mother of 2 young children myself, 5 and 3, so I'm all about school catchments. I worked at, before I started my own business, I worked at Railroad Ascot for a very long time, and Ascot State School is a very popular school catchment, and we saw a lot of that, people moving into the area specifically to try and get into that school. And it's like that with a lot of state schools in Brisbane now, especially primary schools. People will move for their preferred primary school, which will definitely increase the return that you're going to get. And agree with the 3 bedrooms as well. Because like you said, 2 bedroom, if you've got a 2 bedroom townhouse, 2 bedroom unit, yes, it's probably 2 people sharing a couple or a single. It does kind of rule out a lot of families. Whereas if you've got a 3 bedroom, could be a house, could be a townhouse, still suitable for families, obviously looking to get into those areas. So yes, agree with both of those points.
Nice. Shout out to Eagle Junction. We prefer that school.
Yes, Eagle
more
Junction
than
too. Yes,
to the EJ mums.
That has actually come a long way. Yeah. It's, I think, and now it's actually more popular than Ascot. So,
100p.
Yeah.
Very good. Right. So we know what a good investment property looks like. How do you attract the right tenants? And maybe you mentioned that by doing liquor paint and carpets and things like that. Is there anything else that any would-be property investor listening to this goes, I want the best tenant in Brisbane. What have I got to do?
Look, definitely presentation. Presentation is price, presentation, promotion. So obviously making sure that you've got it priced correctly so that it is in line with the current market. So obviously you look at comparables in the area. Presentation is huge. Liquor paint, new carpet, bit of basic landscaping, those kinds of things just draw tenants to a property, and you're going to get a tenant that is house proud, that wants to maintain it, that wants to look after it, and they're the kind of gold tenants that you want, that are going to look after the property like it's their own. They're probably the biggest points, and obviously promotion as well. If you've got professional photos that show the property in its best light, you've got the best listing on realestate.com, that's going to draw in those quality tenants to make sure that we can get one for you that's going to look after it.
Nice. I'll give you a layup on this because I know you guys do this really well. How do you look after the tenants properly? So it's one thing to buy the right investment property, take care of your landlords, they're your clients, right? But actually, and I think some property managers deserve this take, a lot don't, but there is a take that tenants are treated poorly. I don't necessarily agree with that across the board. So how do you guys make sure that you've got the right tenant and then you look after them?
Look, we look after them exactly like we look after our clients, because they're the ones that are living in the property. They're the ones that are looking after the property. We can only inspect the property once every 4 months. So, if you've got a good relationship with your tenant, if you're communicating with your tenant frequently and you've got them on side, they're going to do the right thing by you as the property manager, and also by the landlord as well. So, transparent communication, open, honest feedback between both parties, I think is absolutely crucial when it comes to property management, because at the end of the day, it's going to make our job easier if the tenant is looking after the property and returning the property at the end of the tenancy like it was at the start, especially if you've got an investor that's looking to move back in. We are big believers that the first application is not always the best application. Sometimes it's worth waiting or even adjusting the rent slightly so you can get a really good quality tenant in there. But I think it's really important that, as an industry as well, other property managers, that yes, just because the tenants don't pay us doesn't mean that they don't deserve the same level of service that the clients get. I think it's really important, and I think a lot of people also forget the tenants have investment properties themselves.
For sure.
So they may rent, but they also may be a potential client for you too. So, yeah.
Nice. What's something you wish so let's say you are meeting a first-time landlord. They've just bought their investment property, emotions, aspirations, everything's super high, right? It's like, we've done that. Finally, we're kind of property investors, we're the people that get spoken about on the news for their negative gearing and all that sort of stuff. How good's that, right? What's something that you wish they'd thought about before they bought the property?
I'm going to say the cost to prepare the property for rent. That's something that people don't always take into consideration, and we do a lot of pre-education with our clients that come on within that onboarding period, but unlike sales, there's a lot that goes into preparing a property for rent in terms of your smoke alarm maintenance, your water audits to make sure you can pass them on to the tenants, your professional bond cleaning, your carpet steam cleaning. Have there been pets before? You've got to get a pest control. Whereas a sale, a property can settle and there's no obligation for the seller to do any of those things. But there is an obligation for a lessor to do those things before the tenancy moves in. And if you don't do those things, you can't expect that those things are done at the end of the tenancy. So some of them relate to legislation. Obviously, other things like cleaning and steam cleaning is just best practice. But I would say that's one of the biggest things, because that, there is a bit of money there that needs to be spent initially before the tenants go in. Once the tenants go in, yes, you might have a few little teething issues, but it's pretty smooth sailing after that if you've done that preparation at the start.
What's all of that prep work likely to cost somebody?
Look, it varies property to property. Let's say a 2-bedroom unit, you're probably looking at about $550 for a bond clean, $120 for a carpet clean, $1,200 for your smoke alarms, your water and your carpet and your steam cleaning. So, and also all tax deductible. So
even if you don't have a tenant in place already?
Well, accountants will give you different information.
Correct.
Some will say, yes, you can claim it. Some will say you need the lease in place before you can do that, depending on when those costs fall in the financial year. So, yeah, that'll vary.
Okay, fair enough. Last tip, nothing to do with property management, but it's the question that we ask everybody before they leave us. What is your one tip for someone who wants to buy a house this weekend?
Be prepared. Yep. And I mean, I actually just bought a house myself a couple of weeks ago, and we only looked at it 2 days before. But I think in the market, you've got to be opportunistic, right? I'm in real estate, but everyone's like saying to me, that's crazy. I can't believe you just bought a house with 2 days notice. But I think if an opportunity presents itself, you've got to be ready just to kind of put your best foot forward, know what you're looking for, and just be confident.
I was hoping that you'd mention your purchase, because now that wasn't the last question. We're going to talk about that for a second, right? So you did only see that house 2 days before.
We did.
You bought it at auction.
Yes, we did.
Walk me through seeing it on the internet, having a look at it and going, oh, shit.
Oh, we've got to do something here. Yeah, so we saw it on the internet. I said to my husband, let's go through and have a look. We liked it. We got the kids through to have a quick look. And then we're like, oh, crap, we got to see if we can bid at this auction. Had a quick call with our mortgage broker, got the approval to bid at auction. I was actually running a half marathon that weekend, so my poor husband had to do it alone, which he was very nervous about. But we got it. And, we weren't actively looking in the market, but an opportunity presented itself. It was perfect for our family, so we kind of just jumped on it. And I think that's what people need to do.
For sure. How did those conversations go when you first got that feeling? So you've seen it, you've gone and looked at it, right? Was it, oh, shit?
Yeah.
Are we going to do this?
Are we going to do this? Yeah. And then we were like, yes, we are. If it gets to the price that we're willing to pay for it, then yes, because we had been umming and ahhing for a couple of years. What were we going to do? Floor plan where we are at the moment wasn't great for us. So, it had something that we were thinking about, but just not actively. But yeah, I mean, I'm in real estate, so easier for me to say, yeah, let's do it than a lot of other people. But I think, if you are out looking at properties this weekend and you see something that you like, just be opportunistic, put your best foot forward. And yeah.
Love that. Brooke Willis, thank you.
Thanks, Sam.